Chapter 13, Places of Power. The afternoon brought cool relief. Don Juan and I hiked to a place where volcanic eruptions had taken place millions of years ago. The area was strewn with huge chunks of lava and pieces of shiny obsidian that spread out on the desert like a lumpy gray carpet. The Yaqui Indians regard this as a place of power, Don Juan remarked. They say that there is energy trapped in all this lava rock. What kind of energy? I asked, catching my breath. The kind of energy that can make one discover things of the past. All one has to do is pick up a rock, be silent, and listen to its message. Do you really believe rocks can talk? I asked. Isn't that a bit far-fetched? Don't take my word for it, Don Juan replied. Find out for yourself whether or not it's true. He pointed to a hill not far from where we were. Let's hike to the top of that mound. That's the best spot to listen to rocks. We walked over the uneven terrain. Even though I had on a pair of thick crepe-soled shoes, the rocks and obsidian glass were sharp, and the loose stones made walking difficult. I was careful to avoid the patches of tuna cactus with thorny spines that jutted out between the clumps of rocks. I had once been told that cactus spines were extremely dangerous, for they could lodge themselves in the body and travel to the heart or even to the brain, causing sudden death. I didn't know whether or not that was true, but I wasn't about to put the theory to the test. When we reached the top of the promontory, I was winded. I sat down to rest, taking in the magnificent view. I could see the entire desert valley with its winding highway, weaving in a southeasterly direction. The purple hills in the distance lay like a jagged cutout against the sky. Seemingly from nowhere, a solitary crow flew toward us, cawing as it passed overhead. Don Juan looked up to note its direction of flight. It was flying into the afternoon sun. Does the flight of crows mean anything in particular? I asked. You bet it does, he replied, dusting off his hat. Especially if one has an affinity with them. Crows can be bearers of messages, but it's easy to misinterpret the omens. What happens if you get the message wrong? I asked. All sorts of unfortunate things, he said solemnly. You could wind up going full speed ahead when you should be biding your time. Or you can miss an appropriate turn in the road because you hesitate to act. You mean a crow could save your life? I said. It could, Don Juan agreed. Crows and other entities serve as guides. They tell a sorcerer what to do and when to do it. In the warrior's world, timing is crucial. If you miss your chance, it may never come again. The finality of his words gave me a chill. I knew what he meant. There was a condition of being out of synchronization with life. It was a feeling of inner imbalance, of never catching the crest of the wave and riding with it, but always having it break on top of you. Therefore, instead of a breathtaking ride, one feels tumbled, overwhelmed, as if something had crashed upon one full force when one wasn't ready or when one least expected it. That's what I mean by timing. Don Juan agreed when I described to him this state. What causes this condition of being out of step? I asked. Having lost our connection with our double, he said. I don't understand. Can you explain what you mean? I mean that when we are born, we are intrinsically connected to our other side. The lines of communication with the broader picture, so to speak, are open. But as we grow, we gradually cut off that connection, and we live with only half our being. Therefore, we are always unbalanced and have the feeling we are missing something. Don Juan paused for a moment, as if wondering whether or not to continue. There's something else, he said. It has to do with the way a person is conceived. If you're going to tell me about the theory of the bored conception, I already heard that from Clara. Well, hear it again from me, because it obviously hasn't sunk in. The offspring of any lovemaking will be full of energy and will have the power to live in the moment only if both parents were sexually excited. If only one parent had an outburst of excitation, the child's energetic nature will be imbalanced, and a part of him will always lag behind. If neither of the parents felt very excited, which is usually the case after many years of living with someone, the child will be what we call a bored conception. He will not be capable of energetically grasping life's flow. That's a dismal scenario, I said. Isn't there anything one can do about it? After all, we aren't responsible for what happened during the moment of our conception. Of course, there are other factors besides the initial energetic thrust, and that's the challenge of reestablishing the link with the double. Anyone can do that, no matter how lethargically one was conceived. How can one reestablish a link with the double, I asked. By curtailing self-importance. By not being concerned with the concreteness of things. By becoming abstract in one's thinking and behavior. By treating everything as manifestations of energy and not as objective reality. Focusing on the self takes the energy that one needs to act efficiently. For example, to regret past actions or to be too involved or concerned with the outcome of anything weighs a person down so that he cannot act efficiently, spontaneously, and with the proper timing. What if you just don't know what to do or when to do it? I said in a complaining tone. You must stop and wait until you catch the motion of things, Don Juan replied. And listen for the omens. Watch the indications emitted from the world around you. They act directly on your energetic body. Of course, for that, you have to be absolutely fluid and have to reduce your desires to nothing. You must feel no hurry and have no need to control or manipulate things. Then you can listen to the world's whispers. Sometimes omens tell you how to do something. Such as, for example, which plant to pick for a particular ailment. Or they predict the outcome of a course of action. Naturally, other forces can tell you these things too. What other forces are those? The voice of seeing, for example. That comes directly from your energetic body. Or it may come from another entity that advises you. At any rate, it advises you from a place not accessible to your everyday physical body. And you have to open a channel to that place. Don Juan was unusually serious. He kept glancing at the hillside, as if waiting for someone or something to happen. On an impulse, he raised his arms above his head and stretched. I imitated his movements that could be likened to a monkey bracketing on invisible tree branches. I couldn't help noticing that the sky was a cerulean blue, not gray and hazy as in Los Angeles, where sometimes you can't see the high rises a few blocks away. The sky was a clear, impenetrable canopy, pure and crystalline. I imagined I could hear sounds from miles away, for there was nothing in the air to impede the waves coming toward us. Sit here for a while, quiet your thoughts, and listen to the lava rocks, Don Juan said. I'll go to the other side of the hill so I won't disturb your concentration. You won't disturb my concentration, I said, but he was already walking around a bend. I was about to follow him when it occurred to me that he might have gone to relieve himself behind a boulder. I decided to stay put and try listening to the rocks as he had suggested. Although I hadn't the vaguest notion of what he meant by listening to the rocks, or what I was supposed to hear, if I did listen to them. It took me a long time to quiet my thoughts. I was angry with my mother for not having been sexually excited when she made me. Although Nelida had told me from her seeing that my father had been besides himself with passion, my mother had not liked him and had barely felt a thing. I blamed her for my deficiencies, for being dependent on others for my well-being, which I was well aware was a disastrous situation. As I was mulling this over in my mind, my eye was caught by a shiny object about 20 feet in front of me. The sun was reflected on a piece of glass, or perhaps it was obsidian, or even a piece of metal. As I gazed at it, my internal dialogue gradually ceased. In the desert, where everything is barren, the mind seems to flatten out as if to mirror the terrain. The jagged internal peaks of worry and discontent dissolve, so that inside and out there are no barriers, no expectations, no preconceptions to interfere with the natural flow of energy. As I continued my gazing practice, I experienced a moment of welcomed release, as if concerns that had been weighing me down had suddenly been lifted from me. Until that moment, I had not realized the horrendous burden concerns about the self placed upon one. It seemed much easier to simply let go, rather than to carry them around like so much useless baggage. I scanned the ground until I found what I was looking for. A rock that was near the shiny object seemed to beckon me. I picked up the rock and looked at it. It was an ordinary piece of lava, light and porous, but somehow I developed a rapport with it. It may sound strange to form a sympathetic bond with an inanimate object, but that rock had movement inside it. I gazed at it. It was smooth and round, and had yellow specks shooting off its black surface. I followed the lines with my eyes. Then I saw the glow around it, a bright buff color that seemed friendly and yet awesome at the same time in its agelessness. Following an inner directive, I held the rock to my abdomen. I didn't expect to hear anything, For I was not listening with my ears, and Don Juan hadn't specified what I had to do. But surprisingly, the amorphous chunk of lava began to tell me things. I assured myself that I was merely imagining it, but it didn't matter. I listened anyway. It was a kind of game I was playing to humor Don Juan, so I would have something to report to him later. Mentally, I asked the rock from where it came from, and I immediately received a strong tingling sensation in my womb. And I instantly knew things about the rock that to the rational mind would have been absurd. For example, the rock told me about the depth of the earth from where it had come, saying it was like a womb. It was born, or rather spewed up by a tremendous force eons ago. It told me how it reckoned time in terms of eons rather than years the way we did. And, seen within the limited temporal range we call history, our lives are insignificant with respect to eons gone by. It told me about our blindness, that grave misconception that we operate under, that we think we manipulate nature and control it, ourselves and others. When actually, this is only a mirage, a quality of self-reflection, and most of all, a scarcity of time. As I held the rock, I had a peculiar sense of seeing the broader picture, in which I was being controlled, driven by relentless forces to an inevitable destruction. I felt this in my midsection as a series of soft ripples. It was a muffled movement coming from within the rock's core as I held it to my abdomen. I was absorbing the rock's essence until my entire body felt as if it were covered in layers of subtle vibration. Then, a profound melancholy grasped me as one existential question after another arose. Why am I alive? Who am I? What is the point of all this? For a while, I sat on the hilltop in the middle of nowhere, contemplating the futility of life, when a tremor went through me like the roll of thunder that shook me to the core. I felt a release of feelings that I could not name or isolate. I remembered Clara's words, that there is no end to the wellsprings of man's indulgence. Instead of fighting or containing it, I let the shiver pass until all was still again. I felt exhausted, as if a volcano had erupted, spilling forth mountains of clinging and concern. Experiences that I had not thoroughly recapitulated gushed forth so suddenly that I could not stop to examine them. I didn't even have time to do the sweeping breath to breath, to do the sweeping breath, to breathe those feelings away. I understood how the baggage of memory and experience made me heavy, ponderous, encrusted with concerns about what I thought, felt, wanted to be, or didn't want to be. These mental fabrications served only to weigh me down so that I was forever out of synchronization with time and life. I wanted to let go of everything inside me, leave it all behind, start with nothing, so I could be free. But something in me did not want to let go. It clung to life and feared oblivion. Yet the message of the lava rock was to leave things as they are, not to worry about trivialities, not to strive or interfere. Things will take care of themselves. Live for today, for the weight of all our yesterdays will drag us down, and thoughts of tomorrow will distract us from our present purpose. The rock told me there is a way of perceiving without possessing, and that was by simply allowing life to unfold, to be what it is, outside yet inextricably merged with the self at any particular moment. I looked at the rock and thanked it for its messages. I was about to put it in my pocket to take it with me as a reminder of how important it is to let go, when I felt a tap on my right shoulder. "Haven't you learned anything from your gushing realizations?" I heard a voice say. Instantly, I dropped the rock and looked up, petrified, panting instead of breathing. There in front of me was Nelida. I received such a jolt to my midsection that I feared I had to go to the bathroom on the spot. Nelida told me to immediately assume a half-sitting, half-kneeling posture that sorcerers use in moments of great upheaval. She helped me tuck my right leg under my crotch with my right foot pressing the perineum. My left knee was bent and my thigh and calf were pressed to my body. Use this posture of protection whenever you receive a fright or a jolt, she advised. I sat there for a few moments to compose myself. I had the certainty that Nelida had manifested herself out of nowhere on the hillside like the apparition of the Virgin. Then I realized the absurdity of this and told myself that probably Nelida had been waiting on the other side of the hill, and Don Juan had told her where to find me. "I like the explanation of the Virgin appearing out of nowhere better," Nelida said with a laugh. "I could be the Virgin of the lava. Let's build a grotto here on this spot. People would come from all over to venerate. As the saying goes, where there is veneration, even rocks emit light." I laughed at her light-hearted humor and began to feel more at ease. Nelida sat down on a nearby boulder. I couldn't help noticing how stylishly she was dressed. She had on khaki culottes and a matching jacket, and high black boots that were made of soft Napa leather. She looked as if she was an advertisement for a travel magazine. "Do you envy my outfit?" she asked, noticing my furtive glances. I felt myself blush. The last thing I wanted to do was to envy Nelida's clothes, but something in me couldn't help it. I was so disheveled, so rumpled, that I felt like a sod of earth next to her cool, fresh appearance. How could anyone look so spiffy in the desert? It would never occur to me to dress up, to go romping through the boulders and cactus. I wish I didn't envy all the time, I whined. But I can't help it. Every time I see someone with something expensive or good looking, I want it too. She laughed and reminded me that I had just spent an hour purging myself of desires and attachments. "What happened to To your cathartic realizations, little Miss Me Too, she said, smiling. Well, at least your glances don't include men's crotches. I beg your pardon? Why would I look at men's crotches? Nelida smiled. You'd be surprised at how many women are fixated on men's rear ends. Whenever some woman passes a man in the street, their eyes automatically wander down in that direction. Well, to me, men's crotches are the least interesting part of their anatomy, I said, peeved. Perhaps, she said with a sparkle. But my point is that our eyes are trained to seek out things. For some of us, it's a good-looking face or derriere. For others, it's articles of clothing. We're all trained like monkeys to grasp and covet things. I suppose you're right, I said, but I can't help wanting the exciting things others have. Don't you know that to have possessions is unimportant? She said. There is no need to strive or struggle. Everything takes care of itself. I told her how my mother had spent her entire life struggling to acquire things. China, furniture, knickknacks for the house. And if she didn't have the money to buy certain items, which was usually the case, she would feel deprived and unhappy. There was always that look of disappointment and envy in her eyes whenever we went to visit friends, and she saw something in their house like a matching set of cookware or matching luggage, or when one of her friends showed up with a new dress or coat. I refused to take anything that she had saved for me when I left. I said defiantly, You may not have taken her embroidered tablecloths that she was saving for you in her hope chest, Nelida said, but you certainly took her envy. You would have been better off taking the napkins and silverware and leaving the coveting behind. That sense of coveting was the legacy that she handed down to you. It's easy to leave something concrete like napkins, I said. Those are real. But envy isn't real. How can I let go of something that isn't real? You begin by recapitulating, Nelida said. I already recapitulated that, and it didn't work. It works, but you keep going back to things that you should have let go of long ago. I hadn't even been aware that it was all still part of my baggage, I said. Well, now you're aware of it, she said. Energy leaves from the eyes and also enters through them. So control your glances. It's extremely important to train one's eyes. How can one train one's eyes? By placing all your intent in forging your energy body and never deviate from that purpose, Nelida said. Recapitulating is only the beginning. It loosens your affiliation with everyday life and diminishes the force with which objects impinge on the energy from your eyes. Now, use that added energy not to reinforce your envy, but to forge your energy body, your double. Instead of reflecting envy, use your eyes to energize the double. Only with your energy body will you be able to make the abstract flight. Why do you call it the abstract flight? I asked. Sorcerers believe that there are other universes besides the one into which you were born, she replied. But only someone who has stored enough energy is able to cross over and move through different intersections. How are the other universes different? I asked. The world we are born into is concrete and is determined by organic matter governed by physical laws, she said. It is linearly organized in terms of time and factually organized in terms of space. But with enough energy, we are able to cross over the boundaries that separate worlds upon worlds. Worlds in which energy is inorganic, not linear, but circular, ever present and timeless. Those worlds are not made up of matter, but of energy and awareness. And one can only enter into the other realms by becoming formless and virtually abstract. In essence, one becomes the dream body, and this crossing over is the abstract flight. So don't waste your energy on envying concrete objects you can never take with you, but which only burden you down and will make you stay put. Use your energy to forge your energy body so you can make the abstract flight. How do I forge my energy body? I asked. Nelida did not answer, but beckoned me with a crook of her index finger to follow her. We left the hilltop and stopped at a clearing where she told me to light a fire. When we gathered enough wood, I lit a fire with my matches. Only then did Nelida make herself comfortable on a large rock and begin talking to me again. One sorcery pass in particular has the intent to forge the energy body, she said. And someday someone will show it to you. Now we must use the flame to change the direction of your eyes so that they will no longer reflect human concerns, but the dreaming body, the eyes of the double. She told me to look at the flame through half-closed lids, then turn my head to the left and visualize the fire coming from that direction. I then had to move my head to the center again and look at the real flame again, and turn my head to the left again and visualize the flame. After repeating this action, she said my eyes were fixed away from the direction of everyday life so that the things of the world would no longer have such a strong pull on me. Chapter 14. Guests of Life. Nelida stood up with a few sweeps of her foot and put out the fire. Shouldn't we wait here for Don Juan? I said. She let out an exuberant laugh. He'll know where to find us if he wants. We hiked up a step canyon. I was exhausted and gulping in enormous gulps of air. I don't think I can make it to the top without a rest, I said. Don't be such a wimp. Aren't you curious to find out where I am taking you? I need a rest, I insisted. What you need is to remember you are a guest of the earth, Nelida said as she sat down on a rock. We can rest on rocks, leaning against trees, or simply by pressing our fingers against the center of the palm. But we don't realize we can get energy from little things because we think we are here as conquerors of the earth. I sat on a rock. Immediately I sensed some of the energy of the boulder entering my spine through the pressure exerted on my tailbone. Nelida continued. When we feel that we own people and things, we are wasteful and arrogant. We are coercive and make maltreatment our style of being. To my surprise, the rock was comfortable, and I wanted to ask Nelitha questions so I could prolong this moment of rest. I don't think we can extend the notion of ownership to include people, I said. This isn't the Middle Ages where a feudal lord owns his land and his subjects. Don't fool yourself, Taisha. A mother rules her children. Husbands still own their wives. A priest dominates his congregation. And the media mesmerizes the masses. The world abounds with tyrants, masters, and slaves. Nelitha said it was better to abandon such arrogant or submissive behavior and adopt the role of a humble guest. Why a guest? I asked, shifting on the sofa rock. A guest is free, Nelitha said. Not much is expected of him and the place he is visiting, and the people there are not under his thumb. He expects nothing, yet is giving everything. Sorcerers say this makes for a joyous journey. I was silent, trying to apply Nelitha's counsel to my own state of being. I had always thought it was a mark of character to be acquisitive, competitive, and whenever possible, in control of people. Why not simply accept that we own and control nothing? Nelitha inquired. We have to use things to help us on our journey, true? But nothing is ours to keep or control. How can you say that? I said, feeling threatened. I had grown up with the sense of never having had enough of material things or of being in control of my life. Now, this sorceress was saying that it was deleterious to have material attachments. As if sensing my revulsion, Nelitha informed me that contrary to how it appeared, sorcerers did not covet possessions or try to dominate people. In fact, sorcerers maintain that not even the clothes on our backs are ours, she said, with a glint. How can anything belong to us when we don't have the power to hold it? The shoes I'm wearing belong to me. I bought them myself, I said, playing the devil's advocate. And I suppose you'll keep them for the rest of your life, long after they have served their purpose. Nelitha scoffed with a derisive laugh. Derisive? She had me pegged. It was impossible for me to discard anything, even though it no longer functioned, or I no longer had any use for it. It's pointless to cling, Nelitha said in a softer tone. How can your clothes belong to you when not even the body wearing them is yours? I thought she was carrying the idea of not owning anything to the extreme. I began to defend my point as if my life depended on it, but she merely laughed at me. You're better off abandoning right from the start. The idea of having or owning things, she advised, and adopt a new mode of regarding yourself and others in which nothing is ours, not even ourselves. This way, you cut through the sham of having things and the resulting burden of having to guard your possessions. Stalkers are fluid and frugal. They are free from encumbrances. I didn't like what she was saying. I had visions of having to dispose of my things in a giant garage sale. The frugality of the sorcerer's world was repugnant to me. I was raised with the idea of someday having a house, furniture, a car, and beautiful, stylish clothes. As an adolescent, I would look at fashion magazines and imagine that one day I would be able to afford the clothes featured in them. And I had to admit that the dream of owning my own home was always just over the horizon. "Let's continue walking while we talk," Nelida said, and stood up. She petted the rock she had been sitting on, as if it were a puppy, then sniffed it a few times. "The adjustment that sorcerers have to make," she said as she walked, "is that they cease to regard their body as their own. Then there is nothing they can lose, not even life itself." Nelida explained that one of the fundamental aims of stalking is to care for the body, not as an object or possession, but as a temporary guest. By treating it impeccably, she said, we turn it into a most efficient vehicle for our journey. This means you don't indulge in food or drink or anything that makes you tired, ill at ease, or sick, and you are never needy or wanting because there is nothing that you are lacking. I argued that what a person felt was a result of their circumstances. Some people, I informed her, are born into unfortunate circumstances, like poverty, and have to struggle to rise above it. That may be true, she admitted, but once a person recapitulates their life, poverty can no longer touch them. I don't see how that can be true, I said. Simply because they are no longer there to be touched, she said. How can a person live like that? I argued. I was 13 years old before I had a new dress, and I wasn't happy. Nelida laughed at my self-pitying tone. You mean you wore the same old dress for 13 years? That's incredible. No, of course not, I said, annoyed. I mean, everything I had worn up to that time were hand-me-downs from my cousins. The new dress was a present for my 13th birthday. I still remember how my mother took me to a dress shop to pick out any dress I wanted. I nearly fainted from the tension of having to choose the perfect dress that I thought would have to last me for the rest of my life. I knew I would never get another one. It took me hours of trying things on and agonizing decision-making, for it had to be the perfect dress. On top of everything, I feared that at any moment, my mother would lose her patience and go home without buying me anything. When I finally selected a flouncy maroon and navy blue sundress, my mother looked at me pathetically and said, "Don't tell me you're going to choose that one." And I knew I had made the wrong choice. But I stubbornly insisted that I wanted that dress and no other. When I got home, I wept, because in it, I looked like a pillow sham. Nelida laughed even harder and urged me to stop feeling sorry for myself. She said I had been fortunate, for I could not have made that dress, even if it looked like a bedspread, into a power object. Or you could have ripped it to shreds and thrown it in the trash, she said. I was shocked to hear her say that. I could never have done that, I said. It was the only new thing I owned. Besides, I had to wear it to my birthday party. Look at it this way, she said. When you want nothing, that is the only time you can really be free to enjoy life. You never know what's going to happen next. But since you are no longer attached to anything, it doesn't matter. You simply enjoy the ride. That's the sorcerer's way. To me, it seemed impossible to arrive at a state of such complete detachment, and I admired Nelida immensely for having accomplished it. How can one become so detached? I asked. Isn't it only natural to want to have things? Nelida shook her head. Sorcerers say that our attachments and desires are mesmeric commands, and so they can be broken by being aware of them and using other new mesmeric commands. Take your eyes, for example. I beg your pardon? Your eyes. Are you aware that you constantly rub them? I told her that my eyes itched and that I was probably allergic to some of the flora in the vicinity. But I was not aware that I was rubbing them all the time. Your eyes itch because you irritate them by rubbing them. Why not simply leave them alone? I argued that if one's eyes itched, it was an automatic reaction to rub them. Nelida shook her head. Her eyes glistened in the sunlight. I suppose you consider having sensitive eyes an asset, she remarked. But I assure you it's not. If you stop being concerned with them, the itching will go away. How can I do that? By being conscious of your hand and giving yourself the command not to rub them, she said. In this way, you will have a moment's pause to alter the habit. It might take weeks or months of deliberate effort, but sooner or later, the mesmeric command will be broken, and you won't be able to reach for your eyes without being aware of it. I couldn't see why she was making such a mountain out of a molehill, and was about to reach for my eyes, but caught myself. Nelida said that most things we did were habits we no longer were aware of, so they controlled us. Being jealous, envious, reacting a certain way, all engage in awareness that you have made real, and thus they rule your being, she said. But you are talking about feelings, I said. How can you help what you feel? You can change a feeling the same way you can stop excessive eating or drinking or smoking or anything else you want to change. Nelida explained that the secret to success lay in being aware of the behavior we want to change and then to deliberately alter its flow by an act of not doing. When we disrupt the natural flow of a feeling or action, we are practicing what sorcerers call not doing. Sorcerers practice not doing in order to change, she said. But first you must be aware of the pattern, and for that, you need a deep, thorough recapitulation. If, as in your case, you have learned to react by feeling sorry for yourself or envying others, then every time that feeling comes to you, be aware of it. Stalk yourself. Map out your weaknesses. Then you have a chance to continue or to change. Finally, you can intend anything away before it entraps you. It sounds easy, but is it really possible to change a lifelong habit? You bet it is, Nelida said. But it takes a great deal of energy. Recapitulating helps you acquire the added energy needed for extraordinary feats, such as breaking people's mesmeric commands. I remembered Clara saying the same thing. The difficulty arises when we become obsessive and we turn everything into another doing, Nelida said. You must regard not doing as a game. Perform it often enough, and you will see that feelings and desires are only places where we have accumulated energy. Remove this energy, and you remove the desire itself. Nelida stood up and stretched. At least I thought that's what she was doing. One other thing, she said. Not doing will not work without the sorcerer's cloak of confidence. Try as I might, I couldn't remember anyone talking about the cloak of confidence. The sorcery pass I just showed you allows your energy body to wrap itself in that cloak. She stretched her arms out to each side and took a deep breath. Then she raised her arms to her shoulder level and bent her elbows, keeping the palms of her hands facing down. She squeezed her shoulder blades together while her arms barely moved at all. Then, exhaling slowly and evenly, she brought her arms around to the front and placed her palms together, with her fingertips pointing upward. Why do sorcerers call this movement the cloak of confidence? I asked. This movement tightens the bands of energy across the chest. By pushing the chest outward and the shoulder blades backwards, the energy lines that are sagging become taut again. That bar across the chest of the energy body serves as a shield. Things bounce off it, and that gives one a sense of self-confidence when facing the world of doing. I repeated this motion several times until I felt comfortable with it. With a surge of energy, I made it to the top of the ridge, stumbling over loose rocks as I scrambled up the trail. When I got to the top, I let out an involuntary gasp. Hidden in the tall, bushy trees was a high gray wall that had partially crumbled away, and a shattered archway leading into a hacienda gone to ruin. I could see broken statues and columns on the ground. Steps covered with weeds led to a flat area that once had been a magnificent courtyard. There was even a church that was part of the compound, and many secondary outbuildings that clustered within the walls. I felt my heart leap with excitement. What on earth is such a hacienda doing out here? I gasped. It was built hundreds of years ago and was moved to this spot by the ancient sorcerers, Nelida replied. Your awe comes from the energy that the sorcerers left in that place. Wait a minute, Nelida. Did you say the sorcerers moved it to this place? How is that possible? It would have taken a work crew of thousands of people to dismantle the original buildings and move them stone by stone over this rugged terrain. Nelida shook her head. They didn't dismantle it and rebuild it, she said. The ancient sorcerers intended it. They could cause entire cities to move simply by using their intent. A single hacienda was no great feat for them. Nelida suggested we walk around the outer grounds to make our presence known. For the place oozed sorcerer's intent, and we had to announce ourselves first, before bursting in on it. As we walked, she stressed that the buildings had been deliberately set on an energetic fissure in the earth, and so it exuded power. It was this power that gave my body an added boost, whereas before it was dormant. When energy is circulated, fatigue leaves the body, she said, as we came to the walls that had long ago crumbled away. Suddenly, Nelida let out a shriek that set the hairs on my arms standing at attention. Do I have to yell too? I asked with a shiver. Of course. You have to let intent know you are here. Otherwise, it may spit you out. Then you wouldn't be able to escape fast enough should the power of the old sorcerers turn against you. I took a deep breath, faced the entrance, and yelled, intent, 3 times, as loud as I could. An echo, as if the ancient sorcerers were yelling back, made it even more eerie. When I finished yelling, Nelida peered into my eyes and asked me how I felt. I told her that I was frightened out of my pants, but in spite of that, I felt totally refreshed. Good, she said. That means that the ancient sorcerer's energy has a beneficial effect on you, and we can proceed. What if I felt tired instead? I asked. We would have to turn back the way we came, and you would miss the lessons in store for you here. Now, sit and let silence envelop you so we can proceed through the portals. I had heard Nelida say this before, many times, but I still didn't know what letting silence envelop me meant on a practical level. I asked her to be more specific. She replied that I had just done it, to some extent, with the help of the sorcerer's cry. She elaborated that in order to be silent, one had to let go of the self, and for that, one needed to grab onto something else. For example, the sun's light, or the breath, or to intent itself via the power cry. In this way, energy is released and power can be harnessed. Nelida explained that unveiling and accumulating power was the ancient sorcerer's primary aim. And how does one unveil power? I asked. Nelida sat down on a nearby step. She assumed the right calf in front of the chest position with her hands wrapped around her calf, while sitting on her bent left leg. She told me to assume the same ancient sorcerer's not doing posture. There are many ways to entice power, she began. But they all come down to one thing, and that is to perform every action with awareness. Whether you sit, walk, or eat, or practice the sorcery passes, every breath you take must be a breath for power. Then gradually, the spirit begins to disclose itself, and your energy body wakes up. The yell enables you to clear a path to intent, as well as gives your energy body a jolt. I jumped up, saying I was ready to explore the ruins and to examine some of the figurines I had seen in the courtyard. Perhaps they were pre-Columbian artifacts I could take back to the archaeological museum at the university. But Nelida was adamant. Sit down. We are not here on a treasure hunt or to do research for a term paper. She assured me that such explorations would be meaningless, for they would not help me in my tasks to unveil and harness power. The only things that would be of any value to our present purpose were silence and detachment. Don't get on your high horse and turn this into another doing, she warned. Let power act through you. Then everything will fall into place naturally. I told her that her recommendation was much too vague to be of any practical value. She leaned closer and whispered that she would reveal the only thing that was of any practical value, for it was the key to freedom. The ancient sorcerers were very practical people, she said. So practical, in fact, that they lost themselves in procedures. Modern sorcerers saw that the road of the ancients led to ruin. So they isolated impeccability as their only guide. And why is impeccability the key to freedom? Nelida did not wait for me to offer a reply. Impeccability is the other side of the spirit, like two sides of a coin or two sides of a hill. I wanted to ask her what she meant by impeccability, but she stopped me with a wave of her hand. Smoothly, she changed her position to bring her left knee to her chest and sat on her right bent leg. I copied her. She turned to gaze at the top of the hill we had just climbed down. The ancient sorcerers could go right through that hillside and land on the top, or on the other side, Nelida said. They didn't need to climb to the top first the way we did. They needed only awareness and intent to control the direction of their flight. But some of us have less energy, so that all our actions have to be geared toward being impeccable. Only in this way can we store enough power to let go of the personal self and land on the other side of the mountain. Nelida picked up a stick and drew a curve on the ground that resembled the slope of a mountainside. On this side, there is impeccability, she said, pointing with her stick. Our bodies and our actions and all the things we see and feel must be tuned with awareness and control. On the other side is pure understanding that makes us abandon ourselves. In the middle is a barrier made up of concern that veils everything. It is the fog that must be purified in order to see the other side clearly. Nelida pointed to the middle line of her drawing, the heavy part that formed the mountainside. She said that in our mesmeric state, we only see the personal self and direct everything toward its enhancement. Since it is the self that governs our actions, they are superficial, shoddy, and full of self. We believe the self is immortal. Consequently, we are indolent, as if we had all the time in the world at our disposal. But once we realize there is something beyond the self, something veiled and mysterious, we begin to turn our attention and efforts towards unveiling it and exploring its mystery. The less one emphasizes the self, the higher the spirit will soar, Nelida said. On the other hand, the more self-important we are, the more we cling to emotions, judgments, and ideas. Remove the emphasis on the self, and the spirit will soar. Is there a special chant or breath one can do to get rid of the self once and for all? I asked. What a question, Have you forgotten about the recapitulation? Have you lost sight of the sorcery passes? No, I only meant that was there a shorter way, a quicker way? Recapitulation takes so long. There are no shortcuts to power, Nelida said. Yet anything is helpful when done with proper attitude. What would the proper attitude be? When one is sincere and truthful to one's purpose. When one does not act for personal gain. When one is abandoned and doesn't care a hoot about what happens to herself. Then the mountain of self-reflection becomes so transparent that the spirit can be seen. Nelida stressed that to liberate the energy body and to tap the spirit was the goal of modern sorcerers. Why is that their goal? Because only freedom can bring joy and ease into our lives, she said. Only pure, humble acts can attract power that is needed to cut through the ape's judgments. Nelida added that just as people don't know how to live without the self, the ancient sorcerers did not know how to live without power. Modern sorcerers have a different orientation, she said. How are they bound? They are not interested in controlling people. Modern sorcerers are bound to the spirit. For a while, we were immersed in total silence. I let the place fill me with its vibrant charge. Then I became aware of the sound of birds. Perhaps they had been there all along, only I hadn't noticed them before. It is difficult to let go, Nelida continued, because we fear we will have nothing to fall back on. But that's only because we haven't yet realized that the personal self is illusory. How does one finally let go then? I asked. Letting go is a matter of abandon. When one does it, it is all at once. For some, it may take years of deliberation. For others, it only takes a sudden realization. But when one finally abandons oneself to power, it brings with it a fluidity that makes the actions of the self seem dull and cumbersome in comparison. Nelida stressed that letting go of the self was a stalker's art. One had no qualms in dropping one's person, for one finds it a burden too heavy to carry. Why is this the self? Why is the self a burden? I asked. Doesn't it help us in our life? It ought to. But in most cases, it is a source of fear and discontentment. If you really listen to your internal monologue, you realize that it is nothing but a long list of complaints or self-assertion. A stalker takes an inventory of his internal talk, examines it, and then discards it. I recommend you do the same. For the internal monologue links you to the feelings that belong to your parents and to their parents for generations back. Unless you divest yourself of them, they will extend themselves into the future, ensnaring you for the rest of your life. The sounds of birds stopped. Even the wind had stopped blowing. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a rustling in the underbrush. Perhaps a rabbit or lizard scurrying away. Then I heard the sounds of crickets and realized that they too were under the spell of a mesmeric command. Sorcerers, in order to be free, break away from the human heritage, or what we call the human condition. Nelida continued. Through discipline, they remove themselves from the chain of ape-like existence, with no future or past to bind them. Buddhists call this liberating oneself from the wheel of life. Sorcerers call it puking out one's ape-like existence. A feeling of misery swept over me. I knew I was lost. The process of recapitulating was never ending. Everything I did or felt or hoped for was fuel for the recapitulation. Unless I stopped acting altogether, I was creating more entanglements. Theoretically, I could appreciate the need for not doing. But in actual practice, I still wanted to be in control, to be liked and respected by others, to be in charge of my life. The thought of not getting these things filled me with frustration. Whether we agree with the sorcerer's teachings or not, Nelida continued, sensing my mood. Self-reflection must be stopped, or else we will spend our entire existence trying to fulfill the expectations of our parents and peers. What's worse, we become the petty tyrants we struggle to overthrow. Only by leaving home, family, past and future can we truly be free. I asked Nelida what she meant by leaving home. I had left home, yet I wasn't free. That's because you still carry your parents' feelings with you, she said. You are ambitious like your father. You are looking for love like your mother. You want instant success with no effort. You are in deadly competition with your brothers, and that puts you at odds with everything and everyone around you. Therefore, human concerns are as near to you as they can be. Leaving home is not merely saying goodbye to family and friends, or putting distance between you. It involves relinquishing your place in the emotional food chain. That line that is made up of ancestors and descendants. You must give up your human heritage and its rewards and security, and take yourself out of the quagmire of human affairs. Only when you are so detached that you are no longer bound by a personal self can you truthfully say that you are no longer your parents' child. As long as one is hooked to the self, one is hooked to others, she stressed. Only when one has nothing, expects nothing, and needs nothing is one truly without a self. But I did the recapitulation, and I'm still hooked to others, I said, whining. Nelida stood up and gave me a surprised look, as if she doubted what I was saying. You are hooked to the sorcerer's intent. All you need to do is to acquiesce to it. You have evolved through accumulating power into something else. And that is why we are here on this place of the ancient sorcerers, to prove to your reason that you are no longer your parents' child. How will we do that? By examining the background as well as the foreground. I gave Nelida a blank stare. Without another word, she got up and asked me to follow her inside the courtyard. We passed a series of tiny rooms with doors no more than 4 feet in height. The ancient sorcerers must have been midgets, I mumbled. Recapitulation chambers, Nelida said. But we are not here to recapitulate, but to practice gazing, and through gazing, move our assemblage point to the place of the ancient sorcerers. She told me to sit and make myself comfortable by leaning against the wall. In front of me were a series of pillars, 7 to be exact, arranged in a cluster. They seem to have been at one time the supports of a low roof or very high altar. I gazed at them for a long time, looking not with my eyes, but with a feeling that emanated from my womb, the way Emilito had taught me. At one point, I succeeded in pushing the pillars away from me using my gaze. Then suddenly, it was not the pillars that were being pushed away, but I was being hurled up and backwards a great distance. I found myself on top of a hill, looking down at the pillars. They were at the end of a long tunnel, tiny and in sharp focus, as if I were looking through the wrong end of binoculars. Then each of the pillars grew taller, as high as the sky. It was as if a giant grid with cracks in it had formed in front of my eyes. The world, as it normally is perceived, had split into segments, with each segment separated by a black column. I was looking at the sky, and at the same time, behind the sky, into infinity. Then the pillars shrunk until I was again looking at them head on. Nelida nudged my side. I realized I had fallen over and perhaps passed out. "What happened?" I exclaimed, sitting up. I had a complete distortion of perception. Those pillars were enormous, and I was looking at them from the top of a hill. That was not a perceptual distortion, Nelida clarified when I told her what I saw. Since you entered the sorcerer's world, your acts are performed in a different context. Only your reason refuses to accept this. If you only see what your reason tells you, your acts tend to be shallow, haphazard. In order to see the deep context, you have to remove yourself from your immediate surroundings. And that is exactly what you did. Tell me again what I did? You expanded your vision. The sorcerer's place of power allowed you to do this. Otherwise, you would never know what you are and where you are at any given moment. Not to see where you come from is disastrous. I asked her to explain more in detail what happened so I could better understand what she was driving at. You were on the cliff looking down on the ruins, and suddenly you found yourself sitting on this rock, looking at the pillars. You might think that you only dreamed that you were sitting on the hilltop, and that the pillars were your dream. That is because you regarded the ruins you saw earlier from the ground as real. On the other hand, you might remember having hiked down the mountainside. But if you don't recall sitting down on this rock, you might think you are dreaming this now. The view from the hilltop and the ruins you see now belonged to two different peels of reality. The way the ruins appear, their very existence, depended on the position of your assemblage point. Today you have succeeded in moving it slightly. You saw from two different perspectives. What Nelita was saying was that what we perceive hinges on our capacity and intensity for awareness. As our assemblage point shifts, so does our perception of the world around us. Nelita went on to say that it was because we can hold our assemblage point steady that we can agree and talk about the things we see. But the world is not just what we can agree upon, she stressed. Sorcerers say there are many levels of reality, and waking up our energy body allows us to perceive with a keener awareness so that nothing is the same. You experienced this for yourself. Nelita had often told me that the world is alive and in constant flux, but I always seemed to lapse into my habitual view of it. She said this was because patterns become fixed and stored in a vast storehouse of memory to be called upon again and again. This results in the sensation that the world we perceive is concrete and predictable. We human beings are extremely limited in our repertoire of feelings and actions. You should know this from the recapitulation. We are like drunkards that head straight for the bottle without ever questioning why we drink or even the desirability of drinking. She stated that a set of patterns is presented to us from infancy and reinforced by mesmeric commands that make us repeat them over and over. We become limited because we no longer look at the larger picture. We simply allow our bodies to follow the lines of least resistance. And that is whatever is familiar and known to us. To be aware would mean to allow our energy body to act for us, regardless of what we say we have learned to consider as easy or reasonable. To allow awareness to guide us would be comparable to the alcoholic refusing the bottle, even though his whole being has learned to crave liquor. Will his craving ever stop? Yes, by emptying our storehouse through the recapitulation. We break the hold that concreteness has on us, she said. There is a quicker path. The energy body can wake up and suddenly see that the self is not important. A person who liberates himself from the confines of self-reflection will perceive in a totally different way. I had to agree. By waking up my energy body, my entire perspective had been altered. Yet the prospect of permanent change seemed staggering, but ultimately worthwhile. To clear my head, I gazed at the rocks. Do I really have to leave the familiar world behind and enter some strange reality? I asked at last. You only need to relinquish your idea of the world. But that is everything. For it is our ideas that fix us and make us concrete. And why, you might ask? Do we have to forsake our ideas to be free? Because ideas are limiting, whereas energy is limitless. In order to be one with sheer energy, we must first remove the obstacle of the self. For it is the fog that covers the real and immediate with the false and interpreted. I began to squeeze my shoulder blades together to acquire confidence. As I scanned the pillars, I experienced another perceptual distortion. They appeared to be swaying in the wind. When I remarked on it, Nelida said that there were always distortions. Life was energy, unfettered, yet we imprison and contain it by eliminating possibilities that do not fit our reasonable expectations. One who sees that reality is simply a point of view, acts for no reason, and expects no rewards, Nelida said. Wouldn't such a person be terribly lonely? I asked. Such a person isn't lonely because he or she has aligned himself with that force that moves us and makes us complete. How will I know if I'm acting from the spirit or from myself? I asked, giving my shoulder blades a sharp squeeze. Nelida gave me a dispassionate look. As you continue to act impeccably, you accumulate personal power that ultimately the spirit and your being become one. Then all your acts are the reflection of the spirit's intent.